This video is about the attack on Iran by the US and Israel, but before we get into it, let's rewind and see how everything led to this point. On March 20, 2003, the United States launched a massive invasion of Iraq. The official reason: weapons of mass destruction. The world was told those weapons were an immediate threat. But here is the twist that still haunts global politics today: those weapons were never found. And Iraq's economy completely shattered. Now step back for a moment and ask a bigger question. Why is it that so many countries that the United States attacks, sanctions, or destabilizes end up poorer, weaker, and politically chaotic afterward? Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Syria, and the list keeps growing. Meanwhile, Washington continues to say these nations are a threat to global stability. But here is the uncomfortable question many people around the world are starting to ask. If these countries were truly threats to America, why do they always end up destroyed while the United States walks away stronger? And even deeper, does America really defend democracy, or does it defend its interests first and call it democracy later? Today we are going to examine the history, the economics, and the political patterns behind US interventions. Not propaganda. Not conspiracy theories. Just facts, dates, and outcomes. By the end of this video, you will understand why many nations fear economic intervention as much as military invasion. And you might start seeing global politics in a completely different way. Part 1. The pattern of intervention. The United States has carried out or supported military interventions in dozens of countries since the end of World War II in 1945. Some were direct invasions. Others were coups. Others came through sanctions and economic pressure. Washington usually explains these actions using three main arguments: national security, protecting democracy, fighting terrorism. Those sound reasonable. But when you examine the economic outcome of many of these interventions, a troubling pattern appears. Countries targeted by the United States frequently end up with a collapsed infrastructure, weakened national institutions, massive debt, and damaged economic systems. Let us examine a few major cases. Part 2. Iraq. A country that went from rich to ruin. Before 1990, Iraq had one of the strongest economies in the Middle East. Oil revenues funded universal health care, free education, large infrastructure projects. But everything changed on January 17, 1991, when the United States launched Operation Desert Storm during the Gulf War. The war devastated Iraq's infrastructure, power plants, water systems, transportation networks. Then came something even more devastating: economic sanctions. From 1990 to 2003, Iraq faced severe international sanctions that crippled its economy. According to the United Nations, these sanctions contributed to a humanitarian crisis that affected millions of civilians. Then came the second invasion. On March 20, 2003, the United States invaded Iraq again. The justification was simple: weapons of mass destruction. But by 2004, the US government officially admitted that those weapons did not exist. What happened next? Iraq's economy collapsed. Unemployment soared. Infrastructure was destroyed. And billions of dollars in reconstruction funds vanished through corruption and mismanagement. Today, more than 2 decades later, Iraq is still struggling to rebuild. Part 3. Libya, Africa's richest nation destroyed. Before 2011, Libya was one of Africa's wealthiest countries. Under the leadership of Muammar Gaddafi, Libya had the highest Human Development Index in Africa, free health care, free education, government housing programs. On March 19, 2011, a NATO coalition led by the United States launched airstrikes in Libya. The mission was described as a humanitarian intervention to protect civilians during Libya's uprising. But the war quickly escalated. By October 20, 2011, Gaddafi was captured and killed. What happened afterward? Instead of democracy, Libya collapsed into chaos. Rival militias took control of different regions. Oil production collapsed. Human trafficking networks expanded across the country. and Libya's once functioning economy disintegrated. Today Libya remains divided between competing governments. Part 4, Afghanistan, 20 Years of War. On October 7, 2001, the United States invaded Afghanistan following the September 11 attacks. The goal was to eliminate terrorist networks and rebuild Afghanistan into a stable democracy. For 20 years, the United States poured billions of dollars into the country. But the economic results were fragile. Much of Afghanistan's economy became dependent on foreign aid. Then something remarkable happened. On August 15, 2021, the Taliban returned to power almost immediately after U.S. forces withdrew. 20 years of nation-building collapsed within days. The Afghan economy entered a severe crisis. Banks shut down. International funding disappeared. Millions faced food shortages. 2 decades of intervention ended with the country in economic collapse. Do you see the trend of the U.S. invasions? Part 5, Sanctions, the Invisible Economic War. Not every country targeted by the United States is invaded. Sometimes Washington uses another powerful weapon: economic sanctions. Sanctions can freeze assets, block trade, prevent international investment. These measures can cripple entire economies without firing a single bullet. Countries currently under major U.S. sanctions include Iran, Venezuela, Syria, North Korea, and Russia. For example, Venezuela once had one of the largest oil reserves in the world. But after years of sanctions and political crisis, the economy collapsed. Inflation skyrocketed. Millions of people left the country. Supporters of sanctions say they pressure governments to reform. Critics say they punish ordinary citizens far more than political leaders. Again, the USA did this. Part 6, Who benefits from these wars? Here is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. War is expensive. But war can also be profitable. Major American defense contractors have earned enormous revenues during global conflicts. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. These companies supply weapons, aircraft, missiles, and military technology. Between 2001 and 2021, the United States spent more than $8 trillion on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, according to the Costs of War project at Brown University. Much of that money flowed directly into the defense industry. So critics ask an important question: is war always about security? Or is it sometimes about economics and influence? Part 7, The Democracy Question. The United States frequently describes itself as the leader of the democratic world. But many critics argue that Washington supports democracy only when the results align with its geopolitical interests. History provides examples. In 1953, the United States supported a coup in Iran that removed Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh after he nationalized the country's oil industry. In 1973, the United States supported a coup in Chile that removed democratically elected President Salvador Allende. In both cases, the governments were replaced by regimes that aligned more closely with U.S. strategic interests. Supporters argue these actions occurred during the Cold War to prevent Soviet influence. Critics argue they show a pattern of interfering in other nations' political systems. Part 8, What if one country could decide the world? Now imagine a world where a single country has the power to invade any nation it declares a threat, impose sanctions at will, or influence political leadership abroad. What would that mean for global stability? Some analysts call this unipolar power. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the United States became the world's dominant superpower. But global power is shifting. Countries such as China, Russia, India, and regional alliances are challenging that dominance. Many nations now argue that the world should move toward a multipolar system, where power is distributed among several major countries rather than concentrated in one. Part 9, The Pan-African Perspective. Across Africa, many leaders and thinkers view foreign intervention through the lens of history. Colonialism shaped the continent for centuries. European powers controlled African resources and political systems. That memory still shapes how many Africans view modern geopolitical interventions. When outside powers intervene in resource-rich countries, the question often asked is simple: who truly benefits from the instability? Some African leaders today are pushing for stronger economic sovereignty. They want control over their own resources, currencies, and development strategies. And they are becoming increasingly skeptical of foreign military involvement. Part 10: The Big Question. So we arrive at the central question of this video. Why has Iran been under attack since March 28, 2026, and what's really driving the ongoing conflict? Why do many countries targeted by the United States experience economic devastation afterward? There are several possible explanations. War itself destroys infrastructure and economies. Sanctions isolate countries from global markets. Political instability scares away investment. Foreign intervention often reshapes local power structures. But the debate goes deeper. Critics argue these outcomes are not accidents. They say destabilization can create opportunities for geopolitical control and economic influence, which we see happening now in Venezuela. Supporters of U.S. policy strongly disagree, which is expected. They argue interventions are often attempts to stop dangerous regimes or prevent global threats. But who is the real threat or danger here? The truth likely lies somewhere between these competing narratives. Conclusion: the United States remains one of the most powerful nations in human history. Its military reach is being tested by Iran. Its economic influence is global. But with great power comes enormous scrutiny. When nations that are targeted by U.S. intervention consistently emerge weaker and poorer, people around the world inevitably begin asking questions. Are these outcomes unintended consequences? Or are they part of a larger geopolitical strategy? The debate is far from over. But one thing is certain. In the 21st century, the world is watching more closely than ever before. And the conversation about power, democracy, and sovereignty is only getting louder. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe to the channel. Because in the next video we are going to examine another controversial question. Is the global financial system designed to keep developing nations permanently dependent? You do not want to miss that conversation. Until next time, stay informed and keep questioning the narratives that shape our world.